On the outskirts of a quiet American town stood a building everyone avoided, the old post office. It had been closed for nearly 20 years, ever since a fire broke out late one night, killing a male clerk who had been working overtime. The flames had been put out quickly, but the town never reopened it. The brick walls remained scorched, the inside littered with charred letters and half-melted shelves, like time had frozen in the moment of the disaster. Locals swore they sometimes heard the sound of shuffling papers from inside at night, though no one dared check. Ethan, a college student back home for the summer, had always been curious about the stories. He wasn't superstitious, but he had grown up hearing kids whisper about screams echoing from the building, about mailbags moving on their own, and about a faint smell of smoke that lingered even decades later. One evening, while hanging out with his friends, someone brought up the abandoned post office again. They laughed, daring one another to sneak inside. Fueled by boredom and bravado, Ethan agreed to do it, alone. The night he chose was moonless, the town eerily still. The post office loomed like a dark shadow at the end of a deserted street. He climbed over the rusted chain-link fence and felt a chill crawl over him as soon as his feet hit the cracked pavement. The windows were blackened, the door chained, but one side window had been broken long ago, just big enough for him to slip through. As his sneakers crunched on shattered glass, a wave of cold air swept past him, colder than the night outside. Inside, the air was thick with the faint smell of ash and mold. His flashlight beam swept across rows of mail slots and overturned desks. Dust floated in the air like drifting spirits. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by his footsteps. Then, faintly, he heard it, the sound of papers rustling. He froze. The air was completely still, yet somewhere deeper in the building came the unmistakable shuffle of envelopes sliding against one another. Probably a rat, he whispered to himself, though his throat had gone dry. He pushed forward, deeper into the ruins. His light caught something strange, an unopened letter lying in the middle of the floor, unburned, its white envelope untouched by fire or time. The handwriting was neat and precise, like someone had placed it there recently. He picked it up, and the instant his fingers brushed the paper, the silence of the building broke. From the shadows, a faint voice hissed his name. Ethan. His flashlight flickered. He spun around, but there was no one in sight, only the faint smell of smoke growing stronger, and the creeping sound of footsteps approaching slowly from the back room. Ethan's heart pounded so loudly he was sure whoever, or whatever, was in the building could hear it. He tried to steady his flashlight, but the beam trembled as badly as his hands. The sound of footsteps was deliberate, slow, almost dragging, like someone with heavy boots was making their way toward him. He clenched the letter tightly, debating whether to drop it and run, but some irrational pull kept him frozen in place. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed in again, but now Ethan felt a heavy presence in the room, like unseen eyes watching him. His chest tightened as he called out, "Hello? Who's there?" His voice cracked, echoing back from the dark corners. For a moment there was nothing, then came a whisper, faint but unmistakable. "Return the mail." Ethan spun toward the sound, shining his light wildly, but it only caught broken shelves and blackened walls. His pulse hammered in his ears. He forced himself to move, pushing past a half-burned desk into the sorting area. The room was lined with scorched pigeonholes still stuffed with brittle letters, many edges charred, some fused together by melted plastic. But there, in the center of the wall, was one slot that looked pristine, untouched by fire or time. Its surface was clean, the wood a healthy brown. The letter in his hand seemed to almost tug toward it. Swallowing hard, Ethan slid the envelope into the slot. Instantly, the building groaned. The temperature dropped so sharply that his breath came out in white puffs. His flashlight flickered again, then steadied, revealing something new, dozens of envelopes scattered across the floor where none had been before, forming a trail that led toward the back of the post office. Despite his fear, curiosity pushed him to follow. Each letter was eerily clean, the names and addresses still clear. But when Ethan bent to pick one up, he felt a pulse of heat surge through his fingertips. He yelped and dropped it. Looking closely, he saw that the handwriting on the envelope had changed, it now spelled out his name. His full name. A chill ran down his spine. He hadn't seen anyone write it. He hadn't even blinked. The letters ahead now looked darker, some edges glowing faintly as if embers burned inside them. The trail pulled him closer to the mailroom door, which hung crookedly on one hinge. As he approached, the faint smell of smoke thickened until it stung his throat. Pushing the door open with his foot, Ethan stepped inside, and froze. The room was a ruin of melted shelves and charred floorboards. But in the center stood a man. His back was turned, his mail clerk's uniform blackened and torn, as though burned into his skin. Wisps of smoke curled off him like he was still smoldering. Ethan's flashlight trembled on the figure, but the man didn't move. Then, in a sudden motion, the figure's head turned unnaturally far, almost all the way around, revealing a face that was half flesh, half ash. The eyes glowed faintly orange, like hot coals buried deep. His cracked lips parted, and a guttural voice rasped, "You shouldn't be here." Ethan stumbled backward, his flashlight beam flaring across the walls where ghostly handprints appeared in the soot, fresh and wet, dragging down as if invisible bodies pressed against the walls. The sound of shuffling papers rose around him, filling the air until it was deafening. He clutched at his chest, struggling to breathe, as the burned man stepped closer, each footfall releasing a faint hiss like fire dying in water. Ethan bolted. He sprinted back through the main hall, knocking over scorched furniture. The whispers followed him, low, angry voices demanding things he couldn't understand. As he reached the broken window, his foot caught on something, sending him sprawling. The flashlight rolled across the floor, its beam landing on the letter he had dropped earlier. Only now, it was different. The handwriting was jagged, smeared, as if written in ash and blood. It read, "Ethan Carter. Deliver or burn." A hot wind rushed through the building, slamming doors and rattling shelves. Ethan scrambled up, dove through the window, and landed hard on the cracked pavement outside. He didn't stop running until the post office was a shadow in the distance, his lungs burning, his hands scraped raw. But when he reached his house, something terrible awaited him. The letter, the same letter, sat neatly on his porch, unburned, waiting as though he had never left it behind. Ethan froze on his porch, staring down at the envelope resting so neatly on the welcome mat. His legs trembled, refusing to move closer. He hadn't carried it out of the post office. He was sure of that. He had left it on the scorched floor when he ran. Yet here it was, untouched, his name scrawled across the front in that same jagged, ash-like handwriting. Every instinct screamed at him to leave it, to get in his car and drive as far from town as possible. But something deeper, something that felt almost commanded, forced him to kneel and pick it up. The paper was warm, too warm, like it had just been pulled from a fire. He held it between shaking fingers and wondered what would happen if he opened it. For a long moment, he debated, his pulse racing. Finally, he tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the words written in the same scorched ink. "Deliver what was never delivered. Or share my fate." The message was short, but the weight of it pressed against Ethan like a physical force. He tried to laugh it off, maybe it was a prank. But the memory of that burned man's glowing eyes seared itself into his mind. That night, he barely slept. Every time his eyes closed, he heard whispers in the dark, the sound of envelopes sliding across wood, the faint crackle of fire. Around 3 a.m., he woke to the smell of smoke in his room. Panicked, he jumped up, only to find nothing burning. But on his desk sat another envelope, different from the first, its edges charred, the corner still smoldering faintly though it didn't crumble to ash. His heart sank. This one had an address written on it. It wasn't random. It was an old address. Ethan recognized it instantly, it was his grandmother's house, the one that had been torn down years ago. He whispered to himself, that place doesn't even exist anymore. But the letter remained, insistent, impossible to ignore. The next day, trying to convince himself he wasn't losing his mind, Ethan drove out to the empty lot where his grandmother's house once stood. It was nothing but weeds and a rotting fence now, but as he stepped onto the property, a cold wind swept through, carrying the faint smell of scorched paper. His chest tightened. He placed the envelope on the ground where the front door would have been, muttering, "There. Delivered." The moment he let go, the letter vanished. Simply blinked out of existence. His blood ran cold. For a second, the air grew unbearably hot, like standing too close to a fire, and he swore he heard someone sigh with relief. Shaken, Ethan drove home. He tried to convince himself it was over, that the nightmare had ended with that delivery. But when he pulled into his driveway at dusk, his stomach dropped. There, on his porch again, lay another envelope, this one darker, edges more burned than before. His name was written in deeper strokes, as though gouged into the paper. This time, he didn't open it right away. He carried it inside, setting it on the kitchen table and pacing around it like it was a live bomb. Finally, unable to resist, he tore it open. The message inside chilled him to his bones. 2 more. Fail, and the flames take you. He didn't understand. 2 more what? 2 more letters. 2 more addresses. And who was sending them? His hands shook as he read the last line at the bottom, barely visible beneath smudges of ash. "You carry my burden now." That night, the whispers returned, louder, more demanding. The sound of papers shuffling filled his house, though no windows were open. And when he looked at the clock, the numbers blurred into glowing embers, just like the man's eyes. When he turned back to the table, there were not 1, but 2 new envelopes waiting beside the first. Ethan stared at the kitchen table in disbelief. 3 envelopes sat there now, the original one with its harsh warning, and 2 new ones that seemed darker, their edges curling as if barely holding together. The smell of smoke clung to the air, even though there was no fire in sight. His skin prickled as he leaned closer, almost afraid to touch them. Each envelope bore a different name and address written in the same scorched handwriting. The first was addressed to someone named Margaret Holloway at an apartment complex across town. The second was addressed to Daniel Price at a farmhouse far out in the countryside. Ethan had never heard of either name before. His chest tightened as the memory of the burnt figure in the post office came flooding back. "Deliver what was never delivered," the voice had said. Now it was clear, the task wasn't over. It was just beginning. He stuffed the letters into his backpack, trying to ignore how warm they felt, as though each one carried a burning coal inside. The first stop was the apartment complex. It was old and run down, most of the windows boarded, the paint peeling. The place looked abandoned, but the address was real. He found the door marked 3B and hesitated. His knuckles hovered above the wood before he finally knocked. At first, nothing. Then, slowly, the door creaked open on its own. The apartment was dark, the air stale with dust and mildew. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to leave, but he stepped inside anyway, clutching the letter in one hand. "Hello?" he called out, his voice shaky. No answer. He placed the envelope on a crooked table near the door. The moment it touched the surface, the room shifted. The shadows deepened, and the air filled with a faint crackling sound, like flames catching paper. Ethan backed away, eyes wide, as a figure formed in the far corner, a frail old woman, her skin gray, her eyes hollow. Her lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, she raised one trembling hand toward the letter, and in an instant, both she and the envelope vanished in a swirl of black smoke. Ethan stumbled out of the apartment, gasping for air, his legs nearly buckling beneath him. He couldn't shake the image of that woman's empty eyes. But there was no time to stop. 1 letter down. 1 more to go. The farmhouse was harder. He drove for nearly an hour down winding back roads before reaching it. The place was desolate, its roof sagging, its windows shattered. Weeds and vines choked the porch. He gripped the last letter tightly, his palms slick with sweat. The name Daniel Price burned in his mind. He pushed open the broken front door and stepped inside. The air was suffocating, thick with the smell of rot. The floor creaked beneath him. He set the envelope on the mantel of a crumbling fireplace. For a few long seconds, nothing happened. He almost let himself hope. Then, the air split with a scream. A man's scream, raw, agonized. Ethan whirled around, and there he was, a figure standing in the corner. His body was blackened like charred wood, his hands twisted, his mouth wide open in endless pain. The letter on the mantel burst into flame without burning to ash, the fire hovering unnaturally. The man's glowing eyes locked on Ethan's, and he staggered forward with jerky, unnatural steps. Ethan bolted for the door, slamming into the night air. Behind him, the farmhouse shook violently, the windows glowing orange from within before plunging back into darkness. He collapsed against his car, chest heaving, tears stinging his eyes. 2 letters delivered. But when he opened his backpack to be sure, his heart sank. A 4th envelope had appeared, darker than the others, almost black, the edges seared. This one wasn't addressed to anyone else. It was addressed to Ethan Carter. Ethan sat in his car, clutching the blackened envelope with his name scrawled across it. His stomach turned to ice. The letters had warned him, deliver or burn, but how could he deliver one addressed to himself? His name seemed to writhe on the page, each letter darkening as though seared deeper into the envelope. For a long time he just sat there in the empty farmhouse driveway, trying to breathe, trying to believe he still had control. But the truth pressed in on him like a vice, he was no longer just a messenger. He was the final delivery. Back at home, exhaustion dragged him into an uneasy sleep. He dreamt of fire, letters swirling in the flames, faces screaming from scorched walls, the burned mail clerk standing at the center of it all with his glowing eyes fixed on him. "The burden is yours now," the man rasped, his voice like embers crackling. "The undelivered must find their place. Or you will take mine." Ethan woke with a cry, drenched in sweat, his room reeking faintly of smoke. The envelope was still on his nightstand. Only now, it was open. Ethan's hands shook as he pulled out the paper inside. It wasn't instructions this time. It wasn't a name or an address. It was a death notice. His own. The words were short, blunt, and final, Ethan Carter. Consumed by fire, October 1st. His eyes locked on the date, and his blood froze. That was tomorrow. He stumbled back, nearly knocking over the lamp. His mind spun with desperate possibilities. Could he destroy the letter? Burn it? He grabbed it and rushed to the kitchen, tossing it into the sink and striking a match. The flames licked the edges for a moment, but instead of burning away, the envelope seemed to absorb the fire, glowing brighter until it spat the flame out and landed unscathed back on the counter. Terrified, Ethan drove through the night back to the post office, the place where it had all started. He climbed through the same broken window, his flashlight beam trembling across the ruined hall. The moment his feet hit the ash-stained floor, he felt the shift in the air, like the building itself was aware of him. He pulled the envelope out and shouted into the shadows, "I won't do it. I'm not taking your place." The walls responded with whispers, hundreds of voices overlapping in angry unison. The burned clerk appeared again, stepping out from the darkness, his hollow eyes glowing like embers. "It is not yours to choose," he hissed, smoke curling from his mouth. "The letter has been written. The delivery must be made." Ethan backed away, shaking his head, clutching the cursed envelope to his chest. "There has to be another way," he pleaded. His voice cracked. "Why me?" The figure raised one charred hand, pointing directly at him. "The fire marked you the moment you touched the first letter. You carried what was never yours. Now you carry all of them." As the words echoed, the pigeonholes along the walls burst open, spewing out thousands of glowing letters. They swirled around Ethan like a tornado, slicing his skin as they passed. Each one bore a name, an address, a demand. The air grew hotter, flames licking the edges of the ruined walls as if the building itself were alive and burning again.